guys. Everybody welcome. Day 2. How many of you have hangovers? Liars. Yeah, okay. All right, well, those of you that knew me from my past life and thought anything I did was really spooky, you can blame this guy.
No.
No? Yes. Anyway, Bill does many things he's going to talk about it, most notably director for the Critical Infrastructure Protection Task Force. And I think he's going to do a good job of continuing where Larry left off yesterday with respect to preparedness in the physical world. And I won't steal any of your thunder. I'll just let you go ahead and do it. But ladies and gentlemen, Bill Minear.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. And I'm old enough to know that you were in town yesterday. You had the night last night where you could go out and do whatever you wanted to do, and now you're in here again tomorrow. So you're either tired, hungover, or a combination of. So, the good side of it is I've only got 11 slides. So you won't have to worry about me killing you by PowerPoint. I do have information in it. And as I told Rob yesterday, and I came down and had the pleasure of listening to Larry talk, and then I followed on with Tim and Rob as they talked about pushpin and reconnaissance. And this is my second HackerCon event. I came to the first one that they did a couple years ago. Rob did an outreach to me because I had met Rob just before the first HackerCon came about. The kind of work that I do, and I'll talk about it here in just a little bit, there's a uniqueness to the skill sets that all of you have. And as we've molded some of the cyber specialty people and created hybrids in the kind of world in which I work, it is a piranha feeding frenzy within the broad brush of industry that we deal with for those skill-setted people. So thus why Rob came to me after we created him, and he's done more for us, more so than we will him, but we've broadened Rob's capability, and we've gave him some what I refer to, and you'll hear me in here talk about map tactics. I'm an old school guy. I grew up out of the 80s watching programs like MacGyver, and it's not the figure and what it is, but it's what the hell that guy was. That makes us understand. In fact, his name has become used so widely. Oh, we need MacGyver this situation. Well, okay, what does that mean? So when Rob asked me off the theme to come in here and say, hey, Bill, can you kind of help us connect some dots? And that's my purpose here today, is to help connect some dots, to expand your big brain, as I refer to the IT side of the world, because you've got packed information in there that I'll never get. I texted folks yesterday as I sat through Larry's presentation and said, I feel like Charlton Heston at Planet of the Apes, because I'm a lone dude surrounded by a bunch of really smart people. And what I want to be able to do is to open a window and to bring some skill sets to you that can make you better in the playing field that exists out there. Because at the end of the day, my job is to do my small part to help protect this great country that allows us to do the things like we're doing even right here today. So for me to be in here and to be able to present in this and to put a little presentation together to kind of steer you in that thought process, and I'm telling you, this is outside of the normal venue you would be in, but if you just kind of follow along with me, there is a method to the madness. And again, following off what Larry talked about yesterday and the preparation that goes, I've got some real-time data for those of you that lived anywhere within the footprint of the 29 June derecho, the storm that started in Chicago and whipped our ass clear to the East Coast, and the devastation that it left in its path. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that particular event and how it took. You can't find that written anywhere, how to respond to those. And again, I emphasize some of the information Larry gave yesterday. You don't depend on the first responders to save the day for each individual person. They're looking at a very big picture. In fact, in the world of response, from the federal level looking down in, everything's a local event, and it builds from there. If you can't deal with it from there, it continues to expand to a county event, to a regional, state regional event, to a state event, and then building out. Well, if you take it to the step that Larry talked about, that event starts with you. So if you're not prepared, you've instantly become a victim that has to be somebody that somebody's got to help. So my goal is to kind of wind you up, put a little information in your head, bring out that little bit of MacGyver that everybody has, and some of you are already using it. I witnessed it as I watched folks yesterday as they talked, and I learn each time I come here. Never learn at the speed that I need to learn, but I don't need to, because I have a network that I've built that I can draw on those resources, and it's my collaborative web, and we'll talk about that as well. So humor me as we go through, because my last slide has links to things that has data and information, and I'll reference that so that you'll be able to go out here and maybe get some information and get started in the right direction. So Rob told you my name's Bill Minear. I work for the West Virginia National Guard for an organization as a military authority. I'm a civilian. I'm not a soldier. I have a very broad brush public safety background in law enforcement, fire, and EMS. I was one of the original paramedics years ago back in the 70s when they started them in West Virginia and helped build that program up. So I have a broad brush background there. I work for the National Guard with an organization we call JITEC, or JITIC, Joint Interagency Training and Education Center. And what that really allows me to do is work from a national level clear down to the local level with some pretty highly skilled and crafted people, both from a military side as well as the government side. So I'm very fortunate because the knowledge base that I continue to pack inside my head is because I get a chance to really work with some crafty people. And I get to share some of my information with them and they with me, and we've created some pretty hybrid and unique cultures of people, and that's kind of what I'm skimming the surface on here as well. I'm assigned and work out of what's known as the West Virginia Intelligence Fusion Center. Every state has at least one. I operate out of there in my specific role. You heard Rob mention we call it CIPTF, CIPTF, Critical Infrastructure Protection Task Force. I work for the Adjutant General in West Virginia. He's assigned me to be the overseer at the request of the state of West Virginia to support West Virginia's critical infrastructure mission. I'm also a National Council member to the DHS, and I'll say it once and then give you the acronym, which is long enough, the SLTTGCC. That is the State, Local, Tribal, Territorial Government Coordinating Council. And it took me 6 months to learn how to say that once I got assigned to it. Made up of representatives from multiple states, from multiple levels of state, local, tribal, territorial governments. And we become a support entity to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Office of Infrastructure Protection to give them support and guidance on programs and what works and what's the voice of the people and what do we need. So that's been a real unique opportunity for a guy like me, just an old hoe handle from West Virginia, to be able to be out there and work amongst a lot of folks. Have some certifications. I've been an ASIS board certified protection professional since back in the early 90s. That's it's in the world in which I evolve. That's one of the leading security certifications in the physical security and protection side of the house. I'm also a graduate, 1997 graduate, very proud graduate from the Executive Protection Institute out of Winchester, Virginia. I now serve as an instructor on their staff, and they train individuals to do protective work in a broad brush of industry. And also, my background covers the protection of people, property, and resources, and that has been my focus for the biggest part of my career. I'm also working on a doctorate in executive leadership, and I'm a certified executive coach, so my ability to get out now with industry, all walks of industry, and help them better understand what it is they really need to do to provide a level of protection or improve the resiliency, which is a term I use a lot of. Larry used redundancy yesterday, but what we're trying to do is make ourselves more resilient. And what is that? And there's a host of different definitions you could get. But when we talk about resiliency, and that's our ability to adapt and withstand or sustain any given situation. Again, I'm an amateur radio operator, KD8JUJ. You know, I chuckled, made a note yesterday when Larry said, hey, and it's easy to get, those tests are easy. The hell it is, Larry, for a guy like me. I would beg to differ with you. If you study for it, it is. I learned a lot, totally outside of my normal realm of operation. But I see the need for that because in crisis, true crisis, or catastrophes, when all else fails, being the motto of the ARRL, it clearly is, ham radio operators seem to find a way to make their systems up and operational when all the fancy type of comms that we have in today's government and public safety world just seem to trash out. And that happened with us during the derecho as well. So my mission today is to take about 45 minutes of time to share some thoughts and dots, is what I call it. And I focus on improving your dot as an individual and how you draw and build your web in connecting those dots. And sometimes a person's dot's bigger than it needs to be because that's the particular instant and context you're driving for. So how you connect yourself up with folks, and I'm a guy that the majority of the people in this room have never seen in your life. Some of you that I know and have worked with in the past. But after we leave today, I become a dot that should you want to be able to connect up with me because of the niche you're doing, and I become a resource for information to push to you, that's part of what it is. That's building that collaborative web. And at the end of the day, what I'm hoping to do is, again, to poke you a little bit to bring out that individual MacGyver. And who or why was MacGyver? And I look around the room, there's probably some folks in here not old enough to even understand who he was. He was a fictional government agent that worked for an organization, and that was only in the first season. He rolled over a little bit later and worked for a private sector, big-time government contractor, and became an operator. And they did special projects, some of it mostly being a black or gray op type operation. But MacGyver was a mild-mannered, real quiet guy, had some real deep principles, wasn't real oriented and didn't like being around guns, and they have the whole theme as to why. He had a pretty vast practical knowledge of science, although the debate was he was more of a physicist than he was a scientist, but really who cares? The bottom line was this guy had the ability to take a rubber band gum wrapper and a paper clip and make a friggin' rocket out of it to save the world in any given time. And that's kind of what the mix of the 7 seasons of what it ran. But the reality of it was he was a guy that used his mind, and it was one of the premier shows back then that started putting the ability to think. And because this guy knew what he knew and continued to learn what he learned, it made him smarter, and he applied that knowledge. And that's what's helped carry that over to crazy situations today. When folks talk about, I got to MacGyver this thing to make myself out. It's the ability to make decisions out of making sense what's going on and adapting to it. And that's kind of the nix of what it is. In the role that I do for the state of West Virginia, and DHS divides the infrastructure footprint into 18 sectors, and they target them out. And I'm not even going to dwell on that. I'm going to give you links to get in to find out, because if you don't know about it, and you're in the IT security business, you need to know about it. You need to understand what the National Infrastructure Protection Plan is about. You don't have to go in and print the book off and read it, but you got to have a concept understanding, because that will help take you up that next rung on the ladder. And as we keep giving you information on where to go to become smarter about it, that adds to building that dot that we're talking about. My real piece is to expand the network, the collaborative web, to improve or enhance your own specific resiliency. Because if you're better at what you do, and I tell folks every day, damn, if you can't help yourself, you can't help anybody else. And resiliency starts with you. And I sat in a room clearly packed with a load of folks, big brain people as I call the IT side of the cyber side of the house. But the reality of it is, if that focus is so driven there, and I go back to Larry's talk yesterday, if you can't look beyond that to sustain what it is or adapt to what you're faced with, you're dead in the water. And you're not going to be able to do anybody any good. And when I move into the derecho side and talk about how it took a lot of powerful, depending on people to save the day, a lot of folks became victims themselves through this. And it tested what we were and our resilience greater than we've ever experienced before. You know, you're not going to find what I'm talking about on a shelf or in a bunker somewhere. What you're going to find out is it's what's inside your head. It's using that MacGyver sense that everybody's got. It's just getting the information to learn how to plug and play it. Clearly more than script think or group think. Anybody here know what script think is? Or group think? You'll know once we give the definition. Script think's pretty easy. It's what we've got down in writing. It's looking at all those odds and expecting, hey, this is what it says is going to happen, so here's what it is. One of the best examples I can give you, folks will write all day long plans for dealing with hurricanes, and they'll write them, and companies will develop them and build them out. But if you've ever been, and I've been, grew up and worked, or didn't grow up, but worked on the Gulf Coast for 11 years, the plan in itself just gave you a good understanding. The reality of what you faced, whole different world. Group think, anybody know what that is? You'll never forget this one after we get done with it as well. It's when you take a bunch of really smart folks and you put them in a room to solve a problem, and what you end up finding out is the solution is dumber than the whole core group of people that you put in there. And we do a lot of group think in this country, a lot of it. You'd have been better off if one or two folks would have sat down and worked on the problem and came up with it than to do group think. But it's more than that. You can't sit back and expect to bring the greatest minds together, and I'm going to give you a document, or it's available to you at the end. It just came out this week, and we'll talk about it at the end. But when you download that document, you'll see the great brains of people that were a part of this particular national research project that's been pushed out to say, in the cyber skills arena of what we need today, this is what we roll it out to be. And there's probably some good information in it, but there's also some other information in there that may say, okay, that's probably true based on the eyesight or the lens or how that particular group looked at it. But I made that available. Everything I've got here, short of the 2 books I brought to say, hey, these are good reads and easy reads if you want to get them. But Rob Dixon will have all that information. So what I'm talking about, you'll be able to get with Rob, and Rob can push that out to you. But it's some pretty good data. When I talk about looking at yourself, I talk about, and some of you may do it, some of you may not, but it's a balcony view. So many times we get involved in situations that we're dealing with, and in the heat of the battle, we only see what we see. And when we start to look at ourselves after the fact, how well we did, what we do, we only look at it from that same grade level as where we were. And there's a lot of times you need to climb up in a balcony, is what I use, and look down on yourself and say, wow, what's going on here? And am I handling this the right way or am I not? And there were a lot of times, again, back in the Mac days, that those were the things that he did. Faced with what you're faced with, he backed himself out and said, okay, how do I get there? And what do I really need to do to think my way out? You know, as we work in the world in which I live in, and again, I work in a fusion center where we've been connected. We've built a collaborative web with multiple agencies, government, federal, all kinds of different organizations, and we push and pull data. And we have so much data today, and it doesn't matter. Every industry's got data. But it comes to the point to where we're to the point of an intoxication level. It's almost a form of substance abuse. Probably will be by the time some psychologists and folks here in the next 5 or 6 years get done with it. But, and we'll talk a little more on the next slide about it. Also, I've got a slide that I call the MacGyver 3 aspects of thinking, and it's actually a particular 3 levels of thinking, but it's my slide to roll you into how I want you to take another look at the dot to which you've become. And the bottom line is, Larry talked about it yesterday in redundancy. It's about resilient, how resilient you are, and you're only going to be as resilient. You can't know everything. And if you don't establish some kind of a collaborative web, and you don't own that web that you build, that's a network that you build out there. And it's not all about close, tight partnerships that you build. There may be folks you only meet one time in your life, but you know who they are, and it may be 6 months before you draw on them, but because you made that web connection, you'll be able to reach out to them and expand that knowledge in and out. That's the movement that's going to cross the whole industry, the whole sector growth, the whole push across the country from events we've learned, like the Hurricane Katrinas, everything post-attacks of 9/11 is what's helped us build how much better we are. And it isn't about how much money we can dump into programs to build and buy all kinds of neat gizmos. It's about how we build the network within the different organizations and people. And from that, we will take and get the money to build a better, bigger mousetrap. I mentioned data intoxication. I got a couple of quotes out of here, interestingly, in some of the research that I've done. In fact, the 2 quotes here from Gary Klein's book, Streetlights and Shadows, is one of the books I'll talk to you about if you want something that's an easy read but helps paint the picture of focus of mental image of what you need to be looking at on society today. That's a pretty good book. But the pursuit of data almost in any field comes to resemble some form of substance abuse. And I am here to tell you, if I looked at my BlackBerry right now, I've probably got over 5,000 emails that I haven't even opened up. Because on an average daily kick, I probably get 600 emails because in the job I'm doing, I'm copied or pushed forward on all the information. And some of the intel links that say you need to go into your secure room and read this particular stuff coming out. It's an overwhelming piece that I used to try to address and look at them all day long, and there's just no way that I can. And it's the team in which we work that allows us to make the successes we have happen. When we look at the information that comes in, it's based on the data of what's going on right now in that moment, what could be happening, what has gone on prior to it, and what do we expect to gain out of that. You know, that's the kind of the MacGyver, build my dot, make my wheel bigger and better in what I'm doing. And it's trying to take information that's given to us in its raw form, and I'll give you some examples in here that change the course of how we address the issues we were faced with in our response to the public outcry for help during the derecho. If we'd have followed the normal protocols that were there based on data that was coming from all angles instead of looking for specific information and then making some kind of judgment call, that's what it's about. It's about connecting the right dots. And the folks that we had that were calling shots, making the final decisions of what went where, which is traditionally what happens a lot of the time, and that's what's changing in society today. They did outreach saying, here's what we got, or tell me what you got. Give me your best interpretation of what it is, and what do you think we should handle it. And that's what really helped us succeed in our piece today, or during that derecho. If you are the center hub, and that's why I highlighted in red, everybody in here has got some level of expertise. There's no doubt about it. And you're a lot stronger in some areas and maybe don't have any expertise at all in other areas or a little bit of knowledge of. But the way it evolves and what you're faced with every day is kind of what this wheel shows you. The world in which we live is a natural, shadowy environment. We want to think it's all peachy keen and neat and normal, but you know what? I always tell folks, if there's 30 people in the room, you better count on 31, because somewhere in one of those seats, Mr. Murphy sits, always waiting to wreak havoc and change your day in a direction that you didn't think. And sometimes in today's day and age, I think he brings cousins and aunts and uncles along with him. But that's life. The ambiguity, we get little information, we're tasked to do things, but we really don't know what the whole, that's life in itself. What we have to be able to do are 3 things, and we talked early on about it. We got to be able to make decisions, got to make sense out of it, and we got to be able to change. And we now, in today's day and age with technology, we got to be able to change on the fly to make those kind of decisions. What we're doing and what challenge comes out, and when you read some of the reports and the information that's out, and you'll see it even in this cyber skills report that I'm going to make available to you, we've got to start challenging the way it is. You know, I talked to Rob earlier today, and he was talking about the lock-picking class that seems to follow along and come along with each one of the cyber events. And he says, God, Bill, that's always a good draw for folks. Everybody has an interest in that. And I looked at him and said, well, geez, Rob, that's a great thing, because through my eyes, that's physical security. For whatever reason, that niche finds of, well, if I can do this and gain access through that lockpick capability to get me in to do what other steps, that tells me and feeds on exactly why I'm here today. And that's to expand your knowledge base so that you understand the bigger picture of physical security. If those of you that were here yesterday when Tim was speaking on the recon program they had up here and how they went out and captured photographs and pulled it back in, and he actually used some examples. Well, and here's one that we were able, and I can't even speak your language, so I'll give you some good humor when I try to talk that. But, you know, it was geotagged, and he pulled it down in, and, well, this is the front of a building, and, geez, if we could get hold of that, we may be able to see there's a physical security card access reader, or down the road a camera, or it gives us some lay of land of the building. And in reality, absolutely. I'm telling you, on the things that we're doing with that kind of skill set and what we're bringing them in and expanding that mindset is teaching them those elements about that physical security piece. Because we do assessments. Part of the job that I do is we do assessments all across the country in some very unique facilities. We understand what it takes to make the systems fail or set it up for failure. I'll give you a good example. The room you're sitting in right now, how many of you in here are from this geographic area of West Virginia? How many of you know where Bluestone Dam's at? How many of you are aware of the Bluestone Dam failure scenario and the weak points they've had within the Bluestone Dam for the last 10 years, and for the next 13 years they're going to have problems still repairing it? And they've been running public comment meetings. But what does that all tie to you all? That dam, if it failed in any given day today, we wouldn't be having this class. If we would, we'd be wearing life jackets. So when you take your break and you walk out front of this hotel and you're standing on Canal Boulevard, which is the main drag in front of us, and if you look across Canal Boulevard, that in itself is the greater Canal River. We have two in this state, the Little Canal and the Great Canal River. But when you're standing out there on Canal Boulevard, I want you to look up in the sky, because 34 feet up is where the water level would be if that dam, which is 80 miles away from us, failed. And we've been working those, and so those of you that are in here and listen to what I just said have to be thinking, well, that really sucks because I'm sitting here in this class right now. But the other side of it is that know the valley. The 4 big critical care hospitals that service a big part of West Virginia set right in here. So I'll tell you this also, when you step outside, because y'all will now, you'll have to go out there and say, I got to see what this crazy son of a bitch was talking about. But when you're standing out there in front of the hotel and walk out far enough, because you're going to see Haddad Riverfront Park and the goofy looking shell cover that we have here, but I want you to look to your 2 o'clock, between your 1 and 2 o'clock. Because across the river sits a fuel depot. Okay? And when I get into the derecho piece, we'll talk a little bit about that. But just to give you an idea, that fuel depot supplies over 70% of the fuel that all the gas stations get. Doesn't matter. That's a Marathon terminal, but they sell the gas. Exxon gets it and everything. They just put their additives in when the trucks are in there low, boot, and away they go. But that fuel supplies the needs for the biggest part of the state. And I can go on and on with some of the industries and all up and down here. If that failure scenario occurred, how much time do I have to get out of here, which is what should have been going in your mind. Oh, how much time do I have to move? And it's not any secret information. We're going to see the water rise starting to come up within 5 hours, and we're going to be flooded to the max probably within a 12 to 14-hour period. And we just improved that data because a year ago, the data said we had 25 hours. So people were building their plans. And again, we heard Larry talking about it when he was in here yesterday. What's your plan? People, industries, hospitals are building their plan based on old data. And I set and share with you because there's a lot of things that you need to understand about infrastructure and the role that it plays in your day-to-day life. And again, when we talk about the derecho slide coming in, we'll hit on that. There's 4 little items up here that I want to kind of talk to you about that we've tapped in, and I'll hit them briefly. The 06 Scholar Analyst Program, we've got a university here in West Virginia, central part of the state. They have a national intelligence curriculum that they're bringing students through to feed a real dire need to the intelligence analyst community. Guy that runs that's director of the 06 Scholar Analyst Program is a former CIA and NSA related guy. Very smart, big brain kind of dude. When it comes to IT, knows nothing about it. Can't even use an iPad. Students have to help him through it. But the guy's vision and what he's done is they brought students in, started out with the cyber side of the house. Now they've went all across the spectrum within the disciplines of the university, and they've made it an honors program. And what they're doing with those students is if you go through the regimen to get selected, hired, and brought in, they have created some real unique capabilities to do open source searching. And their work is being seen and used by some pretty high-level agencies. And we use them here in West Virginia for all walks of life, even from an infrastructure piece. If we have certain project-related things, and I'll give you a good example, the Boy Scout Reserve in southeastern West Virginia, they've already done my open source intelligence threat analysis for what's going on. And the unique side of watching these just out of high school and in their first 3 or 4 years of college-age kids, they're so versed in technology and understanding the social media platforms, it's flipping scary. And when I sit in here, and I'm a connect-the-dot kind of guy, so I'm watching Rob and Tim and Pushpin and some of that technology that folks like you all are developing, and I'm thinking, holy God, here's the next tool that can come into those kind of folks that can help us really do some, I can't even put a finger on what its capabilities are because it has some extreme unique uses. I see Pushpin when I was sitting there watching it during the derecho when it was out and power was out and folks still had cell phone capabilities and all, but were having trouble trying to make the connections because the net was just so jammed up or towers were totally over. To take his tool and to geographically be able to sweep parts of the state, unbelievable what that capability is. And if a Charlton Heston kind of guy like me wasn't here in the Planet of the Apes environment to understand and see that, I'd have never been able to make that kind of connection. But those are platforms that I snagged Rob right after they were talking about it, saying, dude, we need to talk about this. Because I see 2 applications, the 06 one and then the whole emergency management media. Tremendous capability with that. The FLOW program, FLOW is an acronym for Fusion Liaison Officer. In a nutshell, we've started a program to broaden our outreach. And we've taken folks from all walks of life. And they're airplane pilots, they're chemical plant folks, they're executive vice presidents of small businesses, they're from the finance industry. We brought them in, we set them down, we trained them, we equipped them with some pretty neat equipment, and we sent them back out. And they are part of our push and pull of information. They're not violating people's privacy rights and all, but they're eyes and ears. And I'll give you an example when I bring up my derecho slides to show you the impact those FLOW people had. Our state's doing a big push on a broadband initiative, trying to extend. You got to understand, we are a rural state, extremely rural, mountainous. The terrain is unbelievable. Folks will come visit me in West Virginia and say, hey, I'm going to be in Martinsburg. Can you drive up here and visit me? How far away is that? And I just laugh because I'm like, dude, you need 2 pack mules and 3 days rations to get from where I am to get to you up there. Folks just don't, they look on the map and say, hey, it's pretty easy. That's a 5-hour drive. That's depending if the roads are in good shape and all, and depending on which way you go. But we're really pushing that because there are some unique Once that system gets in place, and I'll tell you how bad it is for those of, and some of you live here. Somebody made a wisecrack about Boone County yesterday. I think it was Rob. I deal with federal level people all day long. Some of the online training, which I'm going to give you a link to, where you can go in and just cack out training to your heart's content on a whole cast of programs that you should have, some of them anyway, basic concepts. But we get pushed by the feds. You got to get all these folks in, got to get them trained. And they can go online and take it, and we're looking at West Virginia's numbers, and they just don't, they're not, you guys just aren't doing it. You're behind. Well, what they don't realize is we've still got parts of the state that don't even have the capability to get internet access in there, and what internet access they do have is dial-up. You try doing some of these federal programs on a dial-up network, dude, you can start it up and go do laundry and cut the grass and everything else before your first page loads up. And they just can't understand that outside of the environment in which we live. But again, that in itself is reality. We're trying to improve that resiliency mission. Part of what I get the pleasure to work with is what I call the SIP Cyber Techno Analyst. I can't say enough. I take a guy like Rob Dixon, who I did not know 3.5 years ago and was introduced to because they said, you know what, you need to meet this dude. And I like meeting dudes, especially when someone says that. Rob kind of told me what it was he did. I sat Rob down and said, hey, here's kind of the things that we do. And I can visually see things, and we matched some stuff up. We did a couple of small pilot projects. And as I always say to Rob, the rest is history. We've done that with 4 or 5 folks, and we continue to build that piece right now. I've taken folks that came in as flow officers, one guy cyber and specific, worked for a very large organization. We brought him in. We built his DOT, his 3 ways of thinking, and we schooled him up in some training and all, and helped get this guy positioned up because he was feeding our system within here, and he's still feeding it, but as it normally happens, because there's such a high demand for the hybrids we're creating, he was sucked up and away he goes, and he doubled his salary and did the, oh, hey, Bill, I'm really sorry, and I'm like, dude, have at it. That's what the world needs. No school, no college, no university has created any process that's blended that SIP cyber analyst, SIP being critical infrastructure protection. And what we're doing, and we're working with 3 universities in that very footprint in the state to be able to create that piece out. And we don't know what the finished product's going to be capable of doing, but we know by expanding that broad brain, it's going to fill some of the gaps that we've already found that exist out there. When you read the one report that I give you, you're going to see it through the eyes of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And although that need they've targeted is there, they haven't even really touched some of the risk that's out there yet still within the industry. So it's pretty innovative, and it's got some unique opportunities with it. All right, I got 2 slides on the derecho, and realistically, you define it, it was an ass-kicked storm that hit us blindsided. Derecho is a Spanish word that means straight line. And what actually happened on 29 June, that storm, which started out in the Great Lakes, Chicago area, traveled over 600 miles in 10 hours' time. It had winds in excess of 80 to 100 miles an hour as it ran its swath. And you're looking at 2 true NOAA photographs that were done that brought that through. And if you went online and watched those images as they came across, you'll see the expansion of the yellow-red bands as it came through and cut its swath, and it's pretty impacting. You can also go out there and see the lights on satellite image and the lights off satellite image. And that's enough. You know, I'm going to tell you what, because as I told my 9-year-old, hey, you see that? There it is. We got lights. Oh, no, we don't. Yeah, we do. No, we don't. Because he was trying to understand what went on. When you look at what that affected, 4.2 million customers lost power in 11 states and Washington, D.C. Claimed 22 lives that they know of. Probably still somebody out there that hasn't been accounted for yet. West Virginia specific, as we looked at it, we had 700,000 customers. And one of the greatest lessons we learned coming out of this was learning to speak the same language. Gee, how novel, because I stand here today trying to say the same thing to you all. We had to learn to speak the same language, because when you talk about customer in power companies speak, anybody know what a customer is? Close. Larry said address. Meter. That's a customer to them. And how they value, based on there is no right or wrong, but how they value when they consider an area to be back up and sustained, what percent that is versus the emergency response community versus FEMA, it's a night and day difference. That's one of the first things we looked at, because as we were dealing with it, we'd hear them say, oh, we've got power restored to this county, this county, this county, and we're like, that can't be true. I know folks that are out there right now that are still sitting blacked out that don't have it. So what it was, customer became a meter. So when we translated based on the census data geographically in West Virginia, we had a power loss of 700,000 customers in power company speak. We had 1.6 million people. How many citizens do we have in West Virginia? Any of you West Virginians, do you know? What's our population? 1.8 million. We had 53 of 55 counties that got hammered during this particular storm. 87 public water systems sitting dead in the water. No ability. 50% of the state's hospitals were on generator power, and some would go down, some would come back up. Communications, and we have, and again I go back to comments that were made yesterday by Larry, we have a interoperable radio program, part of the federal system, using Project 25, P25 compliant radios. And I'm an old responder, so thank God I'm out of that era, because I was a guy that just had to twist one knob, 5 or 6 locations on top of a radio, to now you can put 5,000 frequencies in there. It's beyond my time. But it knocked us and set us dead in the water. It was disruptive or non-existent. And I'm talking 911 centers, fire departments. The response community became victims. And what was worse for us even beyond that was, you expect, I talked earlier on, got to protect yourself, then it grows to your individual community and expands on up. That's how everything starts as a local event. Well, when West Virginia, as with 11 other states, were devastated, those that we would have depended on outside of our borders were victims themselves. Everybody became victims throughout this piece. I personally was 8 days without power. Worked 20-hour days as part of the response side of the house. Still didn't have power. The fuel depot that I talked to you about, that when you finally go on your break and go outside and look across the way, when I walked down to the end of my street, I live on a hill where I could overlook, and saw they had no power, I already knew the problems we were going to have if we didn't get power back up. Those of you that lived in here and experienced that, some gas stations had power but quickly sold out of fuel, couldn't get deliveries. Some gas stations had power, or didn't have power but had fuel, but they couldn't pump it. I will tell you that live here in the Charleston area, what really saved what we already dealt with as a difficult piece was the fact that there was a bubble of Charleston, and in it sets this particular footprint. If you go down to the Elk River and push your way up, there was a bubble of Charleston that remained in power. West Virginia American Water, which sets right up the Elk River here, maintained power. Had they not, we would have had an additional 300,000 people that weren't able to get drinking water. But their plant was able to stay up and manage and push water out. Now, we had to bring generators in to help push that and get it going. But it set us with what we call the lifeline sectors: water, power, transportation. The ability to get around, the ability to sustain off water and power, and the ability to get fuel, just to do the basic feeds out of it. So, although Larry talked yesterday of, and the doomsday side of things, that derecho, nobody ever could have expected. Hurricanes that hit the coast, they see them coming, they can predict, they plan, they track them. There was no forewarning that was able to take place, and so it caught everybody blindsided. What also hurt us, the geographical location. There was no easy way to get through. I saw a lot of folks, and I'm tell you, if you work in the business that I do, you could sit back and say, oh, this was wrong, and gee whiz that, oh, these folks. I looked for the right things that were done as it came out of this. And it took folks from all levels working together to figure out, how am I going to be able to fix and feed the need? These are actual photographs that I took during the derecho 11-day window that we operated in. And starting in the top left, that is as resources started to arrive from out of state, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And as quick as a response as they could, they brought it in. But what you see are box trailers of water, is what came first, and then generators as they were received in. And those generators came based on a request of, hey, we're without power. These are the things that we think we need. So they started getting that information. What you see is just a snippet of some of the data that was pushed out by a host of people that came together to manage and get it out. And close to 7 million bottles of water were pushed in all parts of the state. Ice, and again, you got to imagine, no power, grocery stores lost everything they had. There was no capabilities to get ice, make ice, no ways to get fuel, no ways to get water. There were people in locations, and some, because of the devastation of the trees and the blockage of transportation routes, couldn't get in or out. We weren't certain until day 4 or 5 who was hurt and who wasn't, because we couldn't get access to certain areas of the state to find out. Comms were down. My office became my truck because I had a cigarette lighter adapter converter that I could plug into. I sat out there throughout the days using my BlackBerry, trying to be able to talk to those that I could reach out with. The last piece that I have on here, and what I have in red at the top, and I again go back to comments that are made, the greatest assets that anybody has, the greatest infrastructure priority, are your people and your economy, and they feed off of each other. The threat dictates how you put that arm or ring of security levels around it. But it's the people and the economy that drives it. One of the greatest examples that we had the week prior to that, the week of the derecho hitting us, we were faced here in West Virginia with the PGA golf tournament event down in Greenbrier County. And if you were in the listening room that I was in, you can only imagine the comments that were coming. Because that event, when you look at it from an economic impact to a great state like ours, that's big stuff. That's a $26 to $40 million economic impact. And that was already set in stage. There were golfers already here when that thing came through. And those that were trying to get in had a difficult time because you couldn't fly into the airports and all. They had difficulty in the fuel. There were motorists traveling in that got stranded early on in the storm. They were trying to get to point Z somewhere around the country, but because the storm hit, they pulled off the road. Let's go ahead and fuel up. Let's get a hotel room. Power was out. They couldn't go anywhere. Do I go with a quarter tank of gas, or where do I go? Well, let's go to a restaurant and eat. Couldn't. They were closed. You can only imagine what hit us. Greenbrier County became an epicenter because it totally took that county out. So within that county set the Greenbrier Resort. And they worked hand in hand. As that golf tournament went on, there were people that have been down there 10 days, 11 days without power and water. And I sat back and watched how volunteers went in, used that skill set. They knew where they were. Some folks chose to sit back and say, man, this is a hardcore thing, and I can't believe they're doing it, and they ought to shut it down. This is crazy. But you know what? When you look at that push and pull of people and money, that's what really keeps the whole bubble of what we're doing functioning and working. A wise person in the infrastructure industry broadened my perspective on the cyber side of the house when we were talking about hacking one day. And I understand hacking through the eyes that you see it. And hacking to me is viewed a little bit differently. And when we had that discussion and the words were echoed back to me, it's like, you know what? Really, hacking's trying to understand the world around you and how you can achieve your goals, and sometimes that's in some non-traditional means. And I'm thinking, well, okay. I look at what I have done over my time in dealing with the Rob Dixons and the cyber specialist people that I deal with in the world that I work, and I'm thinking, well, I did. In essence, I hacked into their world. And I've brought them in and understood their talents and pretty much exploited them to bring them into an arena to get things done. So it really helped me, through my own mind, understand kind of an environment from where you all come from. At the end of the day, bottom line, what I want to see you do is expand your knowledge base into the world in which I'm from, just like I'm doing you all. Because if you do that, and you understand, or you reach out to me because you're trying to understand and I can help connect you up, then we're really making it a bigger, broader world in which we're all trying to do the right things for. The parting dots that I have on here, and I actually brought in with me, for those of you that collect our Fusion Center logos, I brought them of different styles. So I have them here at the end. So if you want them, you're more than welcome. But a couple of things that I referenced out of here that I think kind of paint a picture to where you're at. Gary Klein wrote a book called Street Lights and Shadows. If you're a reader, it's an easy read. You can sit down in 2 days, really 1 day if you're a good reader. It's a good book that helps put things into perspective. National Geographic. Larry, this is one you may want to talk about, or you may want to get it yourself. National Geographic just came out with their new complete manual for survival. The old response guy in me is I collect these things. I've raised my 2 boys to understand what it takes to have a little bit of MacGyver in you. But this is probably one of the best comprehensive books that's out there today, and it's a fairly easy read, and I encourage anybody that wants to really paint a bit bigger picture to get hold of it. The Red Team Handbook, version 6 came out on that. Those of you that are red teamers, and I know you see it through certain eyes, version 6 came out, I believe it was April of 2012 this year. I've sent that to Rob in a PDF form. It's a releasable document. It's been put together, but it gives you some pretty good insight, and again can broaden that dot of yours. Another one that I've sent to him, and I brought a paper copy of that in here today, but Rob already has it, and it just came to me this week because of the council that I sat on, but it's the Fall 2012 Cyber Skills Task Force Report. And it's got the folks that were a part of this report in the back end, but it gives you an overview through DHS's eyes of where they see the skill set that needs to be used in current times and what's coming down the road. Some of you may know about it, some of you may not, but FEMA has an independent study, which is called ISP Program website. And you can go to that website. It's a live, breathing website, but there is a host of online training programs that you can go online and take. And you can just go to Google and just type in FEMA Independent Study Programs, boom, and it'll take you right in. One of them in particular, I fall back on some of the others, is the IS, which is Independent Study 22 program, Are You Ready? And it kind of covers a broad brush of disaster, catastrophic related events and what you should and shouldn't do. And again, it helps better that prepared individual. The NIMS and NIPS, NIMS, the National Incident Management System, in the world in which I evolved, before NIMS came about, which came after post 9/11 disasters, it set the stage for how we responded to incidents. And before NIMS, there were over 50,000 types of command structures, and they've tried to roll all that into one. Last one on there is ready.gov, business continuity. They just loaded up a new program. Those of you that work in and around existing businesses, you can go online to ready.gov, go to their business continuity, download the business suite, they call it. They actually have a separate cyber program where you can build your own, plug in your own data. Once you download it, nobody can hack, or nobody from DHS is pulling your data out. But you can build your own program. Once you feed it out, put it in, print it, boom, you've built your manual. So it's set up to do that. So with that, any questions, Rob? I'll wrap the piece on. I know we pushed a little hard on it, but I wanted to be done.
Just a comment about that don't live here, I mean, I've been here all my life, and the gas stations are just like,
Yeah.
you know, there were things you didn't think you would ever see. And my God, okay, I was without power 7 days. Was it unbearable? I lived through it. MacGyver, we survived.
Yeah.
You know, but to see the reaction, I mean, what came to mind when you were speaking was the guy yesterday was talking about the zombies. They weren't thinking, they were just doing. There was no patience, there was nothing. I mean, it was unbelievable, especially to live here and go through it.
Yeah. You know, and it's clearly you have to experience those kind of events. Now, you survived it. Did it change you and your perspective on how you see things? Absolutely. The fortunate side of the work that I do, and I appreciate you sharing that, is I live and see those kind of things all day long. Because I always tell folks, there is a cadre of people across this country that work every day that allows us to be able to continue to do the things that we do. And in itself is challenging. I knew to get gas once I saw power coming up, and when I knew the feed was going to come back on to the gas terminal, what we normally will see 5 or 6 trucks moving through, fueling up and then going out. The first day the power came back to this, down that way, to the fuel depot, I drove by and there were 24 trucks sitting there in line waiting to fuel up. And that's when we knew we had a recovery. But when I realized that, I sent my information to our Joint Operations Center within the National Guard and to our Emergency Operations Center. And we immediately started rationing the fuel that we had in there. Generators, when they went out to people in the state, we brought in military vehicles. Comment was made yesterday. 2 is 1, 1 is none. There's a prime example. We took military vehicles in the one photograph. They had loaded a generator on it. They knew it was earmarked to go to Greenbrier County, Randolph County, to a hospital. 2 soldiers went with that vehicle, and that was their job. 2 made 1. The generator went there, they stayed there. If power came back up, that generator was unhooked. They knew it was there and loaded with soldiers. They'd retask them to another location. Because how do you get one of those big old generators? We had to use a crane to unload them from a point A to point B logistically. There's no plan that says that. It took a lot of crafty people to say, we got to be able to think smarter in doing this. Those generators came without fuel. Well, okay, gee, that's a great thing if you're getting generators in, but we had no way to get fuel. Well, the big generators went well, but that's a good comment. There was probably over 40 generators stolen because the communications industry put them out at their tower sites to power up, to give comms. And next thing you knew, the generator was stolen, and someone else had it running power at their house. So it became a unique environment when you sit back and study the response of people. And I've been in the response business all my life, but clearly the derecho showed me, and again, technology helped drive a lot of what our capabilities were. But it also, you know, when I do security assessments, I walk in and what I look for is the power source of failure. I've walked into some command centers that looks like Houston NASA control, and the first thing I ask for, where's the one plug that I can pull that powers all that stuff down? Because I'm a pretty good think like a dirtbag kind of guy, that if I can find that single source of power to cripple that, and those are the things from the physical side. I see a lot of checks and balances put into systems standalone. But when you open your eyes and you look beyond it, and those FEMA websites that'll teach you about the infrastructure protection side of the house and start giving you that broader brush of training, that's where I want to see. That's where we started with everybody we've dealt with in that cyber world, building that up. So I hope in some form or fashion that it's given you, hey, a little bit more MacGyver capability. Any other, Larry?
So when I talked yesterday for the keynote, we talked about building a community and helping enable folks, and we talked about bridging the dots. And we started hearing about some of the capabilities, and obviously me not being local, but maybe helpful to some local folks. As a community and you having your community, how can our community
Well, you know, and you hit on a couple of key pieces yesterday, because I work in a system that's got some pretty sophisticated capabilities, and I work with some pretty sophisticated folks. But at the end of the day, and where I've never lost what I've come up with, is exactly what you hit on yesterday. You know what? I don't care how good the system is, it has that potential to fail. I look at, and that's what pushed me out to get my amateur radio license. You know, I'm a big believer in, and part of what I work day and day as I teach, coach, and train people is, if you can't protect yourself, you are no good to anybody else. If you can't lead yourself, you're no good. I mean, how are you going to help anybody else if you can't do it for your own? And how you start that is educating yourself. You don't have to become the resident wizard. I look for folks to become knowledgeable in a lot of things, really great at a key 3 or 4 or 5 things, but knowledgeable in a lot of things. That's the kind of folks that we'll bring in, nurture, and build out of it. If you haven't had a first aid class, if you haven't had a CPR class, you know, if you haven't done some of those basic things, you should. Because, hey, once you know the techniques, it's pretty much the same. You know, it's not, it may change compressions. I've taught CPR for a number of years. Hell, that thing's ran full circle. You know, blow, go, number of compressions, 2-man, 1. Doesn't matter. We're circulating blood. We're trying to get air into the person to keep them alive so somebody else with fancier equipment come in and do them good. And it's the same thing that we're talking about. You know, the comment that I found interesting yesterday, you were asked, how much do you know about the folks in your neighborhood? And I appreciate your honesty in that. Same with me. I've lived in the neighborhood I've lived in for 11 years. I talked for 20 minutes to the lady that lives 2 doors down from me for the first time in those 11 years last weekend. And you know what the conversation came about, and I live in a pretty nice neighborhood, was the fact that she wanted to know the house between us came up for sale. And I noticed when I was over looking at the house, had a big footprint by the front door. Well, this lady, as she was talking to me for the first time in 11 years, we're conversing. She had been daytime burglarized. And a nice, I mean, she just lives right across the river. Went in, and this lived by herself, 70 years old, lost her jewelry, lost her computer. Well, that answered the question, well, what happened? They kicked in my front door. And I'm thinking, well, that pretty explains the footprint next door there. I'd have capped them and they'd have rolled over the hill if they'd have come to my house. Next one down, that wasn't their day. But, you know, the piece of it is, build what it is you need to know that you suspect or see as your niche. And, you know, one lesson I learned from the derecho, I'm an old law enforcement emergency response guy, never let my gas tank get below a half tank. That's a cardinal rule that I violated on June the friggin' 29th, because my plan was on Saturday morning the 30th, I was going to get up, as I normally do, and run out and get gas in the vehicles. I've got 3. One of them had 1/8 of a tank. One of them had a half a tank. And it really hurts me to say this, it was my wife's van. And my other vehicle had 1/4 a tank. And don't think to this day, and she said, make sure you tell them about how you violated your thing. So I have honestly stood before you and bared my soul that I violated one of my cardinal rules. But it's those simple. I carry a case of water in all the trunks of my vehicles. It's simple stuff. But I hope I answered your question, Larry. Anything else?
Yeah, I have kind of a, it's interesting that you two guys were talking, because yesterday he's telling us how to build a jammer to keep federal agents from hearing, conversations around our home. A lot of people in this country really don't trust FEMA and Homeland Security. I'm kind of maybe undecided voter or something. Why should I?
Well, here, and let me give you my take. This is Bill's take, okay, because I work for the government. But the reality of it is and that's what I always preach to folks, the responsibility doesn't rest on, geez, I've been whammied, somebody come save my day. That's not what this country was built on. This country was built on a lot of hard-working folks that said, you know what, when push comes to shove, I'm going to stand on my own 2 feet. What I find very unique, and I'm fortunate to work in, and what I've seen, ours was before 9/11, and that's a whole different story over a beer someday, but the reality of it is to see military, law enforcement, my role was private sector. I'm a guy that works very close within the private sector, to bring those industries, all walks of life together. Our ability to share information, not secrets, but to share information to make the footprint in which we live a better environment, that's what it's all about. Because I'm telling you, I could have put pictures up here showing you FEMA's response when they came in. It was super heat, 110 degrees. I've been out there on that tarmac for 20 plus hours. I'm sweating like a bull moose. These guys show up in flip-flop shorts and a shirt. Of course, they just drove in from somewhere. When I'm looking for the cavalry, I at least want to see your Superman cape coming out of the back of your shirt if you're wearing short Bermuda shorts. But the reality is the government's not the save-all for us. FEMA's trying. It is built on script speak. There's a lot of groupthink there, okay? And the reality of it is you got to be able to decipher through. When you look at the programs that they're developing out there that's on that website, we're doing things now that need to be done. Nowhere else. Had we not have had the attacks, would you ever have seen e-learning the way it's set up on that website? No. So there's a lot of good out of it. I'm the same as he. I didn't know my neighbors. I've learned to know them more. Of course, I've only lived in Charleston the last 10 years. But we've become a society that has become more withdrawn from what it is. And where I personally, and what I see from my leadership pursuit that I'm doing, we're seeing that come out. Collaboration, resiliency. Well, what the hell does resiliency mean? It's different to you, to me, than it is to him. At the end of the day, we've all got good definitions. What it really is, hey, what are you doing to make it better? I learned from him. I took 3 pages of notes in there yesterday because he's spot on. He's got it. He's got a MacGyver niche. I talked to some of you all yesterday in here. Got a better mindset. You know, if you leave the day saying that goofy guy in the front of the room, I don't know what the hell he was talking about, but hey, he gave me some good insight or changed my thinking. That's my goal. That's my goal, is to get you to look through a set of eyes that are totally different than what you've been looking through. And when you get out of here and the further away from this conference you get and you're thinking, what the hell was he talking about? I'd like to know. That's why I put my information up there. Because I'm a guy that'll get back to you. The easiest way to get me is to get through the 304 Geeks or Rob Dixon and those guys. Because Rob knows how to track me down. I get 5,000, like I said, I get emails out the wazoo. When I get a Rob Dixon email, it gets attention because I know Rob needs help. And we push and pull that out. So there is no right or wrong. It is what we make it to be. I cuss the government every day and I work for them. But the reality of it is, it's not their responsibility. It's mine to take the action. And I'm 57 going on 58 and I still come here to these kind of things because I got to learn. I got to keep getting smarter so I understand, because the situation and the systems are changing. So we got to get better at it. It's those that close their eyes and say, I don't need it. Those are the folks you're going to end up helping when it hits the fan. Or the balloon goes up is a phrase we use. I said that yesterday and somebody looked at me like I had a third eye. What the hell do you mean by the balloon goes up? Anything else? Hey, for a Saturday morning, I appreciate you all taking the time to come down here. And again, Rob, I have with me up here some of our Fusion Center lapel pins. You're more than welcome to. My brother.